woman and her teenage son in Wetumpka vanished. Friends and family members still have not gotten answers.
Susan was unlucky with men. In the past, she had twice tried to settle down, but both attempts ended unsuccessfully. The only positive reminders from her failed relationships were her two children, her older daughter, who after the divorce stayed with her father, and her younger son, Evan. Her second marriage initially seemed better than the first. After welcoming their son into the world, the couple moved from Michigan to Alabama to start a new life. Unfortunately, the relationship ultimately didn't stand the test of time. Husband number 2 turned out to be abusive, mistreating not only Susan, but also their son. After yet another argument, Susan decided to flee to her brother's house. She left with just one suitcase and no money. Following the divorce, Susan, who was granted sole custody of Evan, moved to another town. She planned to recover from the traumatic experiences as quickly as possible and start fresh. In Prattville, a small town of just under 38,000 people that became her home, Susan met Jerry Osborne, a former soldier who was working at an emergency call center. He quickly caught her eye, and after a few dates, they officially became a couple. After her abusive second husband, Jerry seemed like the perfect match. Less than a year after their first meeting, the couple walked down the aisle. In 2014, Jerry moved his new family to a beautiful house with a garden in the town of Wetumpka, Alabama. Susan was convinced that this time she had hit the jackpot. She often confided this to her friends. Her husband was kind, warm, and caring. He spared no expense on her, constantly buying her new clothes. He also had a great affection for teenage Evan, easily stepping into the role of a father figure. For the first time in a very long while, Susan felt that she could finally relax. Someone trustworthy, capable, and financially secure had entered her life, allowing her to quit her job and become a full-time homemaker, something she had long dreamed of. She embraced this new role wholeheartedly. She loved taking care of the house and raising her son. Linda Anklam, Susan's mother, was overjoyed. Although she didn't know her new son-in-law very well, she quickly accepted him. One memory that particularly stood out for her was Mother's Day in 2017, which in the US fell on May 14th. She visited Wetumpka to spend time with her daughter. They went to a beauty salon and spent hours talking about life. Susan seemed genuinely happy. A few weeks later, everything changed. Linda noticed that her daughter had stopped answering her calls and texts, which had never happened before. In June, Linda went to visit extended family for an important event. Excited, she bombarded Susan with photos from the celebration. The fact that she didn't receive any response, even after several days, became concerning. At first, though, Linda decided not to raise the alarm. She knew that Susan reacted defensively when anyone tried to meddle in her affairs, so she chose to wait patiently for the situation to resolve itself. Eventually, however, she couldn't stand it any longer and wrote her daughter a letter. Some time later, the envelope was returned with the note, "Recipient unknown." That's when Mrs. Anklam realized that something must have gone terribly wrong. Linda wasn't the only one worried about Susan. Her best friend, Holly, also felt uneasy. The two women had met in Wetumpka, but in May 2017, Holly moved to another state. To stay in touch, Holly regularly called Susan. Unexpectedly, however, Susan's phone stopped working, as if it was no longer registered on the network. Holly wondered if Susan was intentionally avoiding her, upset that she had moved away. Contacting Jerry wasn't an option. Holly didn't have his number. To clear up the misunderstanding, she tried calling Evan, but his phone also went unanswered. It all seemed strange. It took the family a long 2 months before deciding to report Susan and her child missing to the police. Everyone had hoped that Susan's unusual behavior would eventually be explained. On July 29, 2017, Linda asked the Wetumpka police to conduct a welfare check, a procedure to ensure the person in question was safe. When the police arrived at the Osborne residence, they noticed Susan's car parked in the driveway. To their surprise, only Jerry was at home. He was wearing rubber gloves, explaining to the officers that he was in the middle of cleaning, but he agreed to talk. When asked about Susan, he claimed that she had left him. According to Jerry, on May 29th, Susan and Evan got into a car driven by an unknown man. "I'm leaving," she told him briefly. However, the next day she supposedly returned, but only to collect her belongings and a few pieces of furniture. Jerry said he hadn't seen her since. He couldn't describe the mysterious man, nor did he remember the make or colour of the car they had driven off in. He insisted that Susan and her child were alive and well. To prove this, he showed the police a bill for Evan's surgical procedure, which was scheduled for a few days after the alleged departure. However, the officers noticed that the invoice wasn't for a completed procedure, but for a missed appointment due to the patient's absence. The story Jerry told didn't sound convincing. Susan had never before disappeared without a word. When she left her previous husband, she informed him that she was moving in with her brother and would file for divorce in the coming days. Additionally, Susan usually confided in her mother and friends about everything. This time, she hadn't mentioned anything about a new partner. She also hadn't informed her daughter from her first marriage that she was planning to move. Everything seemed odd, including Jerry's behaviour. Not only did he fail to report his wife's disappearance to the police, but he also kept it a secret from her closest family, who had been worried sick for the past 2 months. Moreover, he made no effort to formally separate from the wife who had supposedly treated him so cruelly. Instead, he focused on cleaning and renovating the house. The next day, the police returned to the home, this time with a search warrant. They found Jerry once again wearing rubber gloves, holding a bottle of bleach. For the second day in a row, he was scrubbing everything spotless, which raised suspicions. More doubts arose when neighbours gave their statements. Neighbours closest to the Osbornes recalled that on May 29th, the day Susan supposedly ran away, Jerry carried several large pieces of furniture outside the house. Among them was Evan's bed, complete with the bedding still on it. He dragged the items into the backyard, chopped them up, and burned them. "We remember it very well. The entire area was covered in thick black smoke. The smell of burning plastic was unbearable," the witnesses said. But that wasn't all. After disposing of the furniture, Jerry began a major renovation of the house. He tore down the panelling, removed all the carpets, repainted the walls, and bought new furniture. Such an extensive renovation of a house that was only 6 years old seemed irrational, especially since just a few months earlier, Susan had redecorated it herself. Another shock came with the discovery that 2 of Susan's beloved dogs were at a local animal shelter. On July 12th, Jerry had dropped them off, without explaining why their owner had decided to abandon them. Those who knew Susan had no doubt that she would never have given up her pets, which she treated like her own children. If she had to leave without them, she would have first found them new homes. Confronted with all these suspicions, Jerry Osborne remained calm. Unfazed, he explained that he had decided to renovate the house at the suggestion of his parents. He also claimed that, just before she left, Susan had vandalized the walls by spray-painting vulgarities on them. As a man abandoned, he said he wanted to symbolically erase the past and move forward with a clean slate. However, investigators remained skeptical. Using their search warrant, they decided to test the house with luminol, a chemical that reveals traces of blood, even if it has been cleaned. This decision turned out to be a breakthrough. Blood splatters were discovered in the kitchen, laundry room, and guest bathroom. Additionally, cadaver dogs brought to the scene detected the scent of human remains in the area where Jerry had previously burned the old furniture. All signs pointed to the likelihood that Susan had died in her own home. Unfortunately, DNA tests on the blood found in the house couldn't conclusively determine who it belonged to. At this point, Linda stepped in, informing the investigators that her son-in-law's house was filled with surveillance cameras. If a crime had occurred inside, it was likely recorded. Unfortunately, the investigators' hopes were dashed. It turned out that on June 1st, 2017, Osborne had dismantled the old cameras and installed new ones. In the process, he destroyed all the recordings that had been saved on the hard drives. The police were frustrated. They couldn't determine whether this was merely a coincidence or a deliberate action aimed at covering up a crime. The answer to this question was far from obvious. After all, why would Jerry want to kill his wife? The couple had only been together for 4 years, and until then, they seemed like a happy family. Susan had never complained. She was happy to have found the man of her dreams. However, the reality was a bit different.
We spoke to them about 2 weeks before this all happened.
Still in Michigan, Melissa Canfield is the sister-in-law and aunt, and she used FaceTime to stay in touch with them. She said she never noticed anything out of the ordinary with Susan, and it came as a total shock when all communication stopped.
I remember telling my husband, this is bad. He goes, I know. I don't feel like this is good at all.
Shortly before her disappearance, Susan wrote several emails to her friend Holly. In them, she expressed her concerns that her husband was leading a double life that she couldn't accept. He had created a profile on an adult website for men, where he offered his services as an escort. "I look good, I'm well groomed, and I guarantee satisfaction every time," he claimed. He had even included appropriate photos. Although his face wasn't visible, Susan was able to recognize her husband by his distinctive tattoos. Susan was unable to accept the darker side of her husband. She avoided intimacy and eventually moved out of their shared bedroom. She intended to leave, but wanted to prepare herself well for it. As a full-time mother, she had no money of her own and needed to return to work to gain some independence. After a while, however, Susan changed her mind. In another email, she assured Holly that she loved her husband very much and intended to work through the current crisis together. Holly promised to support her friend no matter what decision she made. Susan's disappearance forever altered those plans. To this day, Susan and Evan remain on the missing persons list. The local police still hope to resolve the case someday. Jerry has not officially been charged with anything, but law enforcement has designated him as a person of interest in the ongoing investigation. The family of the missing woman and child believes that their relatives are deceased, but they would like to know the truth about her fate so they can mourn in peace. It has been 7 long years since Susan Osborne and her 14-year-old son, Evan Chartrand, disappeared from their home in Holtville in Elmore County, Alabama. Neither have been seen or heard from since. What are your thoughts on what happened to Susan and her son? Feel free to share your comments or insights.
Everybody to hear this. They met with Sheriff Franklin today with the Elmore County Sheriff's Office. And the family is going to offer a $10,000 reward for information that leads to the arrest and capture of anybody who is responsible for this mother and son being missing. Somebody out there knows something. They're still being called missing. I don't think anybody that has looked into this believes they're missing. Somebody knows something. In the Sheriff's Office, this is a very active case. They just need y'all's help. If y'all hear anything about what could have happened to Evan and his beautiful mama, please immediately call the Sheriff's Office because a $10,000 reward needs to go to somebody. And please keep this family in your prayers. Thank you, everyone.